For years, Queen Camilla's private bedroom inside Buckingham Palace has been regarded as an untouchable sanctuary, a space shielded from the outside world. Yet one seemingly minor incident has ignited a storm within the monarchy. A hidden section behind the wall of her bedroom was unexpectedly uncovered, revealing secrets no one could have imagined. What was found not only left the royal household in shock, but also raised unsettling questions about Camilla's presence and influence within the family. It is said that during routine renovations and a security inspection, workers stumbled upon a concealed space hidden behind thick stone walls. Inside, they did not find forgotten trinkets or relics of old architecture, but rather items and traces that hinted at mysteries powerful enough to shake the fragile trust among the royals. Speculation spread instantly. Had Camilla been hiding something for years? Could this be evidence of a long-standing scheme, or was it nothing more than a bizarre coincidence? The story grew even more gripping when early leaks suggested that what was discovered could not be explained away so easily. Public debate erupted, media outlets hunted for every scrap of detail, and within the palace itself, whispers of doubt began to multiply. For King Charles, already weighed down by inner turmoil, this revelation threatened to further fracture the delicate balance of his reign. A discovery hidden behind a bedroom wall might sound trivial, but in the halls of Buckingham Palace, it could mark the beginning of a new royal crisis, one that exposes secrets, fuels suspicions, and leaves the monarchy facing yet another storm of scandal. It was meant to be a routine procedure, the kind of quiet palace check that rarely draws attention. Teams from internal security had been conducting structural reviews across the royal residences, ensuring the oldest sections of Buckingham Palace were safe, discreetly maintained, and free of overlooked hazards. Normally, such work happened in the background. Technicians measuring cracks, inspectors noting signs of dampness, electricians checking concealed wiring. Hardly the kind of event that sparks whispers in gilded corridors. Yet on this day, inside Queen Camilla's private suite in Buckingham Palace, one of the most famous buildings in the world, a symbol of Britain, something unusual stirred. Her bedroom, elegant but heavily shielded from prying eyes, was scheduled for inspection under the guise of structural reinforcement. Centuries-old plaster, ornate cornices, and heavy drapery made the room not just regal but unusually difficult to survey. As the team began, they noticed something curious along one of the interior walls, a faint irregularity, barely perceptible to the untrained eye. Running down a section behind an ornate tapestry, the seam did not align with the rest of the wall's design. At first, it was dismissed as harmless settling, the kind that naturally occurs in old buildings. But as instruments were placed against the surface, the readings came back odd. The wall was not as solid as expected. Behind the polished facade, there seemed to be an empty cavity deeper than any of the room's blueprints suggested. Protocol required that anything suspicious be reported immediately. Senior palace security was summoned, and a hush fell over the room. This was not an ordinary discovery. It was something concealed deliberately. The inspectors worked carefully, pulling the tapestry aside and tracing the faint outline of what looked like a sealed entry point. Dust gathered thick at the seams, suggesting it had not been touched in decades. By now, even the most seasoned team members felt the shift in atmosphere. The inspection, meant to last less than an hour, stretched on as whispers circulated. A simple crack had turned into a doorway of questions. What lay behind it? Who had sealed it? And why was there no record of it? The decision was made quickly. The wall would be examined further. As the first tools were brought closer, everyone in the room sensed that this was no longer just a routine inspection. It was the beginning of something that could unravel more than plaster and stone. The real question lingered. Was this hidden wall protecting a secret or concealing a scandal? A hidden passage revealed. The quiet tapping of tools against plaster echoed strangely in Camilla's bedroom. Every scrape and measured cut deepened the sense that the inspectors were no longer dealing with an ordinary wall. Bit by bit, the surface gave way, revealing not just a hollow cavity, but something far more deliberate. Beneath the polished plaster and decorative molding lay a concealed panel, its edges sharp, its frame reinforced as though whoever built it intended it to remain hidden for generations. The discovery shifted the room's mood instantly. What was expected to be a tedious survey now felt like the opening chapter of a mystery novel unfolding in real time. Palace security authorized careful removal of the panel, each movement made with meticulous precision. Finally, with a reluctant creak, the concealed door loosened, expelling a gust of stale air that was unmistakably aged, the breath of a space that had not seen daylight in decades. Behind it, the beam of a flashlight caught something unexpected, a narrow passage lined with stone, coated in dust and cobwebs. The air smelled of mildew, and the silence was so heavy that even the inspectors hesitated before stepping inside. The corridor was narrower than a man's shoulders, forcing anyone who entered to move carefully, almost sideways. The construction seemed old, perhaps dating back to modifications long lost in palace records. Some whispered that many royal residences contained hidden rooms and secret passages, relics of an era when kings and queens required escape routes or private chambers beyond the reach of servants. But this felt different. The architecture was less like an escape route and more like a vault, deliberately sealed and forgotten. Palace blueprints confirmed the strangeness. No mention of a hollow corridor in that section of the building. No record of additional chambers branching off Camilla's suite. Step by cautious step, the inspection team moved forward. Dust fell from the ceiling with every motion, and the faint scuttling of unseen insects made the silence even more unnerving. The deeper they went, the clearer it became that this was no simple structural quirk. The passage had been deliberately closed off, and something lay waiting at its end. The corridor terminated in a small alcove, its stonework darker and more worn. There, barely illuminated by swaying flashlights, stood a large object, a locked, weathered chest, eerily out of place. It looked as though it had been placed there with intent, then abandoned to time. The team exchanged glances. What had started as plaster dust in a royal bedroom had led them to a forgotten chamber. As they prepared to examine the chest, one truth was clear. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure it would never be found. The chest in the shadows. The object sat in silence at the far end of the hidden corridor, cloaked in dust as if time itself had tried to bury it. The beam of a flashlight danced across its surface, revealing a chest that seemed centuries older than the room it was hidden behind. Heavy, rectangular, and bound with iron fittings. Its hinges were corroded, its wood warped with age. Yet the lock remained stubbornly intact, as though sealed with purpose, not merely abandoned. The inspectors paused, unsure whether to proceed. Discovering an undocumented chamber was one thing, but an object so deliberately concealed raised the stakes. Protocol demanded that palace security take immediate control. Within minutes, senior officers arrived, their footsteps echoing ominously through the hidden corridor. They ordered everything documented, photographs of the chest, precise measurements of the alcove, and a record of every detail before the smallest latch was touched. Even so, the atmosphere grew heavier with each passing second. The team couldn't shake the feeling that the chest was more than forgotten storage. There was a deliberate quality to its placement, centered perfectly within the alcove, facing outward as if waiting to be discovered. No dust trails led to or from it, suggesting no one had touched it in decades. The lock, though rusted, appeared strong. Initial attempts to force it open with ordinary tools failed, as if the chest resisted being disturbed. One officer suggested moving it to a secure location for controlled examination, but others argued it should be opened on site before too many people learned of its existence. The debate underscored the discovery's unusual nature. This wasn't simply another relic from palace history, it was something hidden with intention. The decision was made to proceed cautiously but directly. Crowbars and specialist equipment were brought in, their clanging against the iron fittings echoing through the narrow passage. Each strike felt louder than the last, reverberating in the stomachs of everyone present. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the lock cracked with a jarring snap. For a long moment, no one moved. The chest stood vulnerable, its secrets inches from exposure. Flashlights hovered above, waiting for the lid to be lifted. The senior officer gave the order, and slowly, with a groan from its rusted hinges, the chest opened. What lay inside was not stacks of gold, forgotten jewels, or old palace inventory. Instead, the first glimpse revealed layers of parchment, ribbon-bound bundles, and leather covers dulled with age. The room fell silent. Whatever this was, it was no trivial discovery. The past, it seemed, had been locked away deliberately, and now it was demanding to be heard. Contents that defied expectation. When the chest lid creaked open, the team leaned closer, bracing for outdated inventories, forgotten ledgers, or discarded personal effects. Yet the sight before them stilled every breath in the narrow passage. Beneath a thin layer of dust lay bundles of letters tied with faded ribbons, stacks of yellowed parchment, and several leather-bound journals bearing the unmistakable weight of something personal. These items were not the typical clutter one might expect in a royal residence. They were intimate, curated, and carefully arranged, as though someone had deliberately preserved them. Each bundle appeared fragile, the paper so thin it could crumble with the slightest mishandling. The faint scent of aging ink and pressed parchment rose from the chest, carrying an almost haunting sense of presence. Like stepping uninvited into another's private reflections. The inspectors hesitated, aware that what they had stumbled upon might transcend their mandate. Palace security ordered the contents handled with precision. White gloves were pulled on, photographs taken, and every item logged. Slowly, the first set of letters was lifted out, revealing delicate handwriting across unposted envelopes. The ink was faint but legible, the pen strokes deliberate and full of character. As one journal was carefully opened, the handwriting inside was immediately familiar to those who had studied royal history. These were not anonymous notes or trivial household records. The words belonged to someone whose voice had once captivated the world. Though the team refrained from reading deeply at this stage, the names, phrasing, and dates offered unmistakable hints. These writings were private reflections, never intended for the public eye. What made the discovery even more confounding was its location. Such items would typically be archived, cataloged, or stored in secure collections where historians and royal officials ensured preservation. Yet here they were, hidden behind a bedroom wall in a sealed passage no one knew existed. The deliberate concealment suggested purpose, perhaps secrecy far beyond simple oversight. The journals varied in size, some small and pocket-sized with worn covers suggesting frequent handling, others heavier, bound in dark leather with gold-etched corners, crafted to endure. Folded pages were tucked between volumes, as if hidden hastily. Unsealed envelopes contained notes addressed without formality, written as though never meant to be sent. Every new layer uncovered raised more questions. Who had placed them there? Why had they been hidden this way? And what truths might they contain? The team knew immediately that this was not just a discovery of old paper, but of voices silenced and stories untold. The chest had not revealed treasure or relics, but something more potent, testimony that could rattle the monarchy far more than any misplaced jewel or forgotten heirloom. Diana's unheard voice, the moment the first pages were read in silence. The atmosphere in the hidden passage shifted. What began as a structural inspection had transformed into something almost sacred. The handwriting, delicate yet firm, carried a familiarity that left no doubt. It was Diana's. Every curve of her letters, every flourish of ink matched what the world had seen in her signed letters and public notes. But these were different, unfiltered, unguarded, and written in spaces where she believed no one would ever look. At first glance, the entries read like diary reflections, short sentences, fragmented thoughts, moments captured in raw honesty. Yet the content struck deeper than casual musings. There were confessions of loneliness, unspoken fears, and a recurring sense of being overshadowed. Diana's words carried no intention of performance. They weren't meant for interviews, public sympathy, or shaping a legacy. They were words meant only for herself, aching with the weight of their truth. One passage, written in fading blue ink, read, "In reality, she was chastised by the media and stifled by the conservative royal family. They smile at her now, the way I once hoped they'd smile at me. It is as though my absence has made me easier to love, but never while I was here." Though no names were explicitly mentioned, the implication was unmistakable. The shadow of Camilla lingered in nearly every line, not as a direct accusation, but as an ever-present reminder of a wound that never healed. Another entry carried a darker tone. "Sometimes I wonder if my voice will only matter when I am gone. Perhaps then they will stop softening me into what I never was." The thought was chilling, not for any direct prediction, but for revealing Diana's fear of erasure, of being rewritten into something palatable for others' comfort. What startled the team most was the consistency of the reflections across multiple journals, spanning months or perhaps years. Diana returned repeatedly to themes of invisibility, isolation, and the fragile hope that her truth would one day surface. There was no bitterness in her words, only a quiet resignation, as though she had accepted how history might treat her. Mixed among these reflections were letters, unsent and without stamps, some folded and tucked into journals as if hidden from even herself. These carried the same voice but a more intimate tone, written to unnamed recipients. Context hinted at family, confidants, or perhaps her sons when they were too young to understand. Palace security officers, trained to remain impartial, were visibly shaken. They were not just handling paper, they were encountering a voice silenced for decades, now speaking louder than ever. It was clear that Diana had left behind more than reflections. She had left fragments of a legacy someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal. Those fragments had now broken through the walls, literally and figuratively, demanding to be heard. Palace in panic, the chest had barely been removed from the hidden passage when the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace shifted from curiosity to crisis. What had been dismissed as a structural inspection had uncovered documents of unimaginable sensitivity, and the implications were too heavy to ignore. Within hours, the find was quietly transported under guarded escort to a secure archive room. But whispers of the discovery spread faster than officials could contain them. Behind closed doors, senior advisors scrambled. The monarchy had long perfected the art of crisis management, measured statements, carefully crafted silences, and strategic distractions. But this was different. These weren't headlines about scandalous behavior or fleeting controversies. These were Diana's raw, private words, undeniably real, hidden inside Camilla's bedroom wall. The optics alone threatened to shatter decades of carefully rebuilt trust. Meetings were called in rapid succession. Advisors, legal experts, and senior courtiers debated in hushed but heated tones. Some argued for immediate disclosure, insisting concealment would inflame suspicion if leaks emerged. Others urged complete secrecy, claiming acknowledgement would fuel speculation and reopen wounds the royal family had spent years trying to heal. King Charles, according to palace insiders, reacted with visible strain. For him, the revelation struck at both personal and institutional levels. This was not just about history, it was about his wife, his late ex-wife, and the fragile balance of loyalty and memory within the monarchy. His first concern was said to be his sons. How would William and Harry react? How could this discovery be explained to them, let alone the public? Security officers involved in the inspection were placed under strict confidentiality agreements, their involvement effectively erased from records within days. Yet silence proved impossible to enforce. Too many staff had witnessed the operation, and quiet murmurs began slipping into the palace corridors. The question repeated endlessly: who had placed Diana's writings inside Camilla's private quarters? And why had they been hidden rather than archived? The uncertainty gave rise to a storm of speculation. Some insiders suspected the chest had been moved during the chaotic period following Diana's death, misplaced and later concealed without explanation. Others whispered of deliberate concealment, a choice to keep the writings from public view or even from her sons. The press office, normally quick to issue clarifying statements, did nothing, No confirmation, no denial, not even a carefully worded deflection. Their silence spoke volumes. The absence of control and lack of narrative created a vacuum the media and public were eager to fill. What had started as a hidden wall and a dusty chest had evolved into something much larger. A test of transparency, loyalty, and the monarchy's ability to survive truths it had long hoped would remain buried. For the palace, panic was no longer about what had been found. It was about what might happen if the world learned everything Diana had left behind. William and Harry's painful awakening. When word of the discovery reached Diana's sons, it wasn't delivered through formal palace channels or carefully prepared briefings. Instead, fragments of information trickled into their worlds. An urgent message here, a hushed explanation there, until the reality became undeniable. Their mother's private words, hidden for decades, had been found sealed behind a wall in Camilla's bedroom. For Prince William, the revelation was deeply personal. Diana's memory was not just his inheritance, it was the foundation of his public role. Every step toward the throne carried her shadow, and now her voice had resurfaced in a way that both honored her and reopened wounds he had spent years stitching closed. Those journals were not history, they were pieces of his mother, preserved and then concealed. The idea that they had been hidden in Camilla's private quarters felt almost like an intrusion on her legacy. Prince Harry's reaction, though similar in grief, took a sharper edge. His distance from the institution had already given him freedom to speak openly, and this discovery reinforced his belief that too much of his mother's story had been controlled, edited, or silenced. According to close sources, Harry demanded immediate transparency, insisting Diana's writings belonged first to her family, not to palace vaults or secret committees. The contrast between the brothers was striking, yet their pain was shared. William leaned toward measured caution, wary of exposing his mother's words to public scrutiny before fully understanding them. Harry saw no reason for delay or secrecy when their mother's voice had already been taken from them once before. Behind closed doors, their conversations were raw, emotional, and at times fractious. Old tensions resurfaced, but beneath them lay a truth neither could escape. Diana's presence had returned, demanding acknowledgement, and both sons felt the pull of responsibility. The palace had hoped to manage the fallout quietly, but the involvement of William and Harry made that impossible. This was no longer about security protocols or royal image. It was about a mother's voice unearthed from silence and two sons unwilling to let it be buried again. For William and Harry, the awakening was painful but also a reminder. Their mother's truth had survived, hidden in shadows, and now it had found them. Camilla's silence and anger. When the discovery was brought to Camilla's attention, her reaction was swift, sharp, and layered with disbelief. Those present during the briefing recalled her expression shifting from confusion to fury in moments. She demanded to know who had authorized the inspection, why her private suite had been entered so thoroughly, and how something so sensitive had been found there without her knowledge. Her aides attempted to reassure her, framing the inspection as routine and unavoidable, but their words barely registered. Camilla was livid, not only at the intrusion, but at the implication. To have Diana's most personal writings unearthed within her own chambers carried a symbolic weight she could not ignore. It was as if history had crept into her bedroom, refusing to let her escape the shadow she had lived under for decades. Outwardly, Camilla chose silence. No public statement, no comment, not even a hint of acknowledgement. Behind palace walls, however, her anger was palpable. She accused staff of incompetence, even betrayal, suggesting someone might have orchestrated the ordeal to humiliate her. The idea that Diana's voice could rise again from within her private space was more than inconvenient. It was a humiliation that threatened to undo years of careful image building. Her relationship with King Charles reportedly strained under the discovery's weight. While Charles urged restraint, preferring to manage the fallout through quiet strategy, Camilla's instinct was defensive, even combative. She wanted answers and control, but control seemed to slip further with every whisper about what had been found. Advisors debated whether Camilla should confront the issue publicly, but she refused. Any denial, she argued, would only inflame speculation. Yet her silence bred suspicion. To the public, it appeared like evasion. To insiders, it looked like fear. What angered her most, according to those close to the Queen Consort, was not the discovery itself but the narrative it threatened to ignite, that even in her reign, Diana's presence remained unshakable. The past had broken through, and this time it had done so within the walls she considered her sanctuary. Camilla's silence was not strength, it was the sound of someone cornered by ghosts she could never fully escape, a legacy that refuses to stay buried. The chest discovery did more than expose forgotten journals. It tore through decades of silence. Diana's voice, thought confined to memory and carefully edited archives, resurfaced in her own hand, unfiltered and impossible to soften. Every word carried weight, every line a reminder that her story was not finished. No matter how hard the palace tried to control it, this was not the Diana of glossy photographs or royal documentaries, nor of rehearsed interviews or second-hand accounts. What emerged from behind Camilla's bedroom wall were private reflections, honest, raw, and painfully intimate. They spoke of invisibility, longing, and a woman whose public smile often masked quiet despair. Decades later, those thoughts rang louder than any crafted palace statement. For Prince William and Prince Harry, the writings felt like fragments of their mother returned, revealing sides of her they had not fully known, moments she had chosen never to share. To them, the find was both a gift and a wound, an unexpected connection wrapped in the pain of secrecy. Why had these pages been hidden? And why here of all places? For Camilla, the implications were devastating. It wasn't just that Diana's journals had been uncovered, it was where they were uncovered. Behind her bedroom wall, in her private quarters, the symbolism could not be dismissed. Even without proof of how the writings ended up there, the discovery painted her as the keeper of another woman's silenced truth. Within Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere shifted from anxiety to reckoning. Courtiers debated, advisors argued, but the reality was unavoidable. Diana's voice had escaped the shadows. The monarchy, built on order and control, now faced a force it could not contain. Some legacies are too powerful to be buried, and Diana's was one of them. Through those words, pulled from the darkness of a sealed wall, her presence returned, not as a memory, but as a voice impossible to erase.